not worked with Shelley. She is just a dynamo, and she is driving this project like nobody I've ever seen. So if you ever need somebody to do a project, she's the gal. All right, on for our program today. Did any of our members watch or hear about actor Robert De Niro's introduction of fellow entertainer Bruce Springsteen at the Tony Awards 2 weeks ago? That he felt best started with an expletive and then the president's name. How about the NFL players kneeling during the national anthem? Did you celebrate their First Amendment rights of free speech? Or do they make you angry that sports figures and entertainers are using, or some believe, misusing their platforms? Do you feel uncomfortable seeing fellow residents literally shouting down their elected representatives at local borough and township meetings, almost in a mob mentality? I have personally witnessed all three of these experiences, and to be sincere, they have left me a little flat and truly trying to figure out if this is the new normal. Our speaker is Dr. Matthew C. Moen, president of the Gettysburg Foundation. As president of a philanthropic education organization, part of his mission is to educate the public about citizenship, leadership, conflict and conciliation lessons, and the battle and aftermath that Gettysburg teaches. Dr. Moen offers audiences a lifetime of research and scholarship in American politics. Matt enjoyed a distinguished career as a university professor, teaching thousands of students, authoring and co-authoring 6 books and dozens of articles on American politics, providing commentary to leading media outlets like ABC News, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. He received a BA from Augustana College and a PhD from the Department of Political Science at the University of Oklahoma. His most recent position was 15 years as Dean of the College of Arts and Science at the University of South Dakota, with responsibilities for a $40 million budget, 16 departments, 200 plus faculty. He's awarded the title of Distinguished Professor Emeritus by the South Dakota Board of Regents. Professional leadership roles include chair of the Professional Ethics Committee of the American Political Science Association, chair of the Board of Directors of the South Dakota Humanities Council, president of the New England Political Science Association, and this one is most impressive to me, president of the Council of Colleges of Arts and Science, comprised of more than 1,600 deans at 600 colleges and universities. Dr. Moen speaks across the nation at universities and service clubs about ways to fix incivility in American politics, drawing upon the lessons of Gettysburg Battle, President Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, and current public policy ideas that could foster civility. My way over in the car today, listening to NPR, guess what they were talking about? Incivility. Fellow Rotarians and guests, please warmly welcome the president of the Gettysburg Foundation, a fellow Rotarian, Dr. Matt Moen.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's nice to be with you today. Thanks for coming out and enjoying today. I'm going to jump right into it. Di warns me that when she stands up, I have 2 minutes, and so I think she means business, and so I'm going to hop right into it, and we'll see where we go. Incivility in American politics has risen to unimaginable heights, proven in books with titles like Rude Democracy, or Your Examples. But we really don't need it proven to us. We see it and we feel it in our hearts with a palpable sense of unease, and with good reason. The American democratic experiment is durable but not guaranteed. Historically, a dozen democracies around the world have perished in violence. With 10 more voted out at the ballot box, we are watching that happen in Turkey. The enduring genius of our system is that the Founding Fathers designed it to fragment and divide political power, trusting no one with too much political authority so as to preserve our individual liberty. That explains our 3 separate and co-equal branches of government, our elaborate system of checks and balances, authority reserved to the states, and a Bill of Rights providing a series of written protections for individual citizens. But with this deliberate fragmentation of political power comes slow and incremental policy change, requiring patience, moderation, compromise, bargaining, as leaders try to resolve the differences that naturally arise in a vast, complicated nation. Unfortunately, we're in one of those times in American history when we aren't working in the system as it was intended. Rather than showing respect and patiently seeking solutions, many of our leaders and fellow citizens are deliberately stoking division to gain short-term political advantage in a cycle that just keeps escalating. So today, as the battle anniversary draws near, let's spend some time blending inspiring stories from Gettysburg with specific ideas to improve civility in American public life in a way that will be at times a little bit rough, but I hope ultimately lifts us all up. The July 1-3 Battle of Gettysburg is familiar to you. Outnumbered Union soldiers retreat through town on day 1, hold the high ground on the flanks on day 2, hold the center against Pickett's charge on day 3, send the Confederates back to Virginia. That's how much I'm going to talk about the battle. You all know it. Now imagine yourself as one of 2,400 residents of Gettysburg on July 4th. You have endured 3 days of fierce fighting, the largest battle in the history of North America, and you emerge to find Dante's hell on earth. 51,000 total casualties, thousands dead requiring burial, thousands more wounded, some merely seeking comfort as they pass from this life, others needing care. Thousands of dead horses that must be burned before they incubate disease, equipment littered everywhere, refugees flooding back, and especially poignant, the families of free African Americans forced to flee because if captured, they would be sent south into slavery. Also streaming into Gettysburg are civilians seeking answers to the fate of loved ones, along with voyeurs anxious to see the site of the catastrophe. Raise your hand if you think this is a fun Rotary program so far. So let's pivot. Well, 3 days of combat is the signature storyline at Gettysburg, always will be. A second informs our conversation today. It starts on July 4, 1863, and runs to the present. For 155 years, Gettysburg has been less a place of conflict than a place of healing and kindness, remembrance and reconciliation, forgiveness and redemption. Here's one slice of a remarkable story. Immediately after the battle, residents offer food to the hungry, water to the thirsty, and help for the injured, much like the Good Samaritan of the New Testament. Elizabeth Thorne, 6 months pregnant, helps bury over 100 men, which is why there is a monument to a pregnant woman at Gettysburg. Lydia Hamilton Smith, African mother, Irish father, starts her daily trips on a wagon into the countryside, explaining the carnage at Gettysburg and returning with donations for people in need. A tent hospital called Camp Letterman is hastily erected where wounded of both armies are treated. Quaker nurses stream in large numbers from communities like this to care for the wounded. Worried about morality, nurses and all those young men, the guidelines say the nurses should be, and I quote, mature in years, plain to almost homeliness in dress, and by no means liberally endowed with personal attractions. Like you can't make this stuff up. You find it and you go, wow. Convalescing Confederates write letters home telling loved ones that they are being cared for without regard to blue or gray uniform. A great tribute to the citizens of Pennsylvania. I recently ran across a Union nurse who confirms that care of both armies, although she confesses in a letter to a friend that she does give the slightly better looking apples to the Union soldiers. Several months after the battle, Abraham Lincoln delivers healing words in the most famous speech by an American president. He commemorates sacrifice in the Gettysburg Address without any hint of triumphalism. He never gloats about the Union victory. He never maligns the Confederates. In fact, when you read it, you notice that he never mentions either side. Lincoln also speaks about the survival of democracy. He starts with the birth of the nation in the spirit of the Declaration of Independence in 1776. That's the math behind 7 years ago, minus 1863. He finishes with the fervent hope that I assume we all share, that governments of, by, and for the people will not perish from this earth. He skillfully blends thoughtfulness, humility, compassion, and resilience, which is why that speech endures. Never mind, he could say everything in 272 words. I'm already way past that, so cut me some slack. Healing continues for decades through veteran reunions. The 50th in 1913 brings 50,000 soldiers. President Wilson characterizes them as enemies no longer, but as generous friends, the quarrel forgotten. The high point of reconciliation is when Confederates reenacting Pickett's charge are met with cheers and handshakes from Union men with what is described as brotherly love and affection. The 75th anniversary in 1938 brings dedication of the Eternal Light Peace Memorial by President Roosevelt, who speaks of divided loyalties now meeting in united loyalty. The 100th year brings Vice President Lyndon Johnson, who calls for racial reconciliation, mindful that the post-war reconciliation was among white veterans who fought, without attention to the slavery issue precipitating the conflict or the painfully slow progress on civil rights. The bottom line: Gettysburg is appropriately remembered as a battlefield, but its full meaning runs much deeper, with profound relevance to today. For long has it been a place exhibiting what Lincoln so famously described as the better angels of our nature. Let's bring that spirit to bear on our current conversation. We live in the most free and prosperous nation in the history of the world because of the sacrifices and ingenuity of those who came before us. But we must earn our democracy in every generation, and right now, sadly, my generation seems to be botching the task of handing over a smoothly functioning democracy to our kids. The evidence is everywhere, and here comes the rough part that I promised. Start with polls commissioned by Newsweek and Annenberg showing that 44% of Americans cannot explain the Bill of Rights, 35% cannot name a single branch of government. We fail to teach the fundamentals of our government, and ignorance blended with incivility invites volatility. Back up to 2016. Senate Republicans refuse to consider a Supreme Court nominee. House Democrats sit on the floor of their chamber in protest. The political left and right work to tamp down free speech and voter turnout, respectively. The presidential contest turns dreadful. Hillary Clinton describes millions of Americans as a basket of deplorables, a shameful characterization. Donald Trump encourages people at mass rallies to chant "lock her up," as if we are a kangaroo court rather than a nation of law. Basic truthfulness comes under pressure, ranging from unproven sexual rumors about Trump in Russia to claims that Clinton is operating a child sex ring out of a Washington, D.C. pizza parlor, which sounds kind of funny until we remember that shots were fired over that. We hear Orwellian phrases like alternative facts or truthful hyperbole to obfuscate truth. The phrase fake news is invented to discredit phony news, but also top-notch journalists reporting unflattering realities. And truthfulness is critical to democracy. Lincoln said of Americans, "If given the truth, they can be depended upon to meet any national crisis. The point is to bring them the real facts. No matter who you blame, we may be failing that test." America has enjoyed the longest run of free regular elections in human history, but now our own leaders undercut citizen confidence by saying our elections are rigged. In 2017, we sink deeper. Some Republicans clamor to prosecute Hillary, a defeated political opponent, which could take us down the path of some of the more corrupt regimes in the world. Some Democrats call for presidential impeachment ahead of evidence and without attention to constitutional standards. Elected officials become targets. People openly scream at town halls. In a development that few notice, the Federal Election Commission, think about this one, decides that members of Congress can buy security systems for their homes with campaign funds. Republican Congressman Steve Scalise is gunned down while practicing for a charity softball game. In 2018, the House Intelligence Committee implodes while investigating Russia's involvement in our elections. On and on it goes. Think only about the zaniness of the last few days. A restaurant asks a private citizen to leave because she works in the White House. A congresswoman incites people to harass those working for the administration. And the president feels compelled to tweet out that the congresswoman has an exceptionally low IQ. I can't speak for you, but I feel a little bit like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. It's only a dream. It's only a dream. It's kind of a bad dream. Economist magazine annually ranks the world's nations on 60 criteria as to whether they are true democracies, flawed democracies, hybrids, or authoritarian regimes. In 2015, we dropped down a category from true to flawed democracy based on citizen mistrust of government. Richard Edelman runs a worldwide global communications marketing firm that produces an annual global trust barometer. He chronicles an implosion of trust, his phrase, for business, government, non-governmental organizations, and the media in 2017, the single largest drop. Anxiety runs high. The American Psychological Association, good luck in your psychology studies in the year ahead, finds a rise in stress levels in a 2017 survey. 57% of respondents say politics is a very or somewhat significant source of that stress. A 2017 Marist poll shows that 70% of Americans think political civility has worsened no matter who you blame. So now you can all take a deep breath. The run of exhausting news is over. Let's remember that we are not helpless characters in this storyline. We can take tangible steps to improve civility. We can start with simple, personal steps. Stay calm. Insist on appropriate conduct. Contact politicians and convey that expectation, and vote. Read literature. Nothing is better for learning empathy for others than books like Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin or Melville's Billy Budd. Social science research proves that people do behave better when hearing occasional moral reminders, so dispense them. Psychologists have shown that appropriate role models do inspire others to be better people, so be one. And in his book, The Character Gap, Christian Miller points out that being an active responder rather than a hesitant bystander encourages others to be virtuous. Simple steps, we can all do them in our own lives, starting today. And Rotarians might well lead the way. The four-way test, after all, stresses truth, fairness, goodwill, and better friendships. Embrace complexity. Jefferson kept an African-American mistress and he owned slaves. He also penned a Declaration of Independence that called for more freedom and self-government than the world thought possible. Reality is complicated, most social media simplistic. This may sound quaint in this era of self-importance, but we can bring a greater sense of personal humility to our political opinions. We've become convinced through our self-selected media echo chambers that our opinions are right, our motives are pure, so those who disagree with us must be foolish, or maybe even ignorant. All of us can bring greater humility by just deciding to. No one stops us from listening, from trying to understand the views of others. And overlooked is that we can experiment with public policy changes to improve political civility. One of my last efforts as a dean was to go on a civility tour in my home state. This was back before all of the recent dust-up. Tossing out ideas to try to improve the tone in Congress. Here were some of the ideas floated. I don't know if they're good ideas. I'm just trying to think of ideas to make this better. You can like them or not like them. Just trying to think of them. The Constitution requires members take an oath of office. It's been changed 4 times. Let's change the oath again, requiring members to collegially and respectfully discharge their duties. That would be a moral reminder. The House of Representatives permits 1-minute speeches at the start of the legislative day. They are zingers. Just stop it. Starting the legislative day on a better tone. Gerrymandering, the process of drawing legislative districts to the advantage of one political party, has a storied history. Now paired with technological precision, it is a sometimes destructive art form, allowing predictably safe seats and spawning very liberal and very conservative candidates. Maybe it's time to use a nonpartisan citizen commission to draw districts. 6 states do it that way, 7 use bipartisan commissions, the rest could. Repackage an idea that I helped push years ago. The candidates publicly sign a code of ethics pledging to run a positive campaign. A moral reminder to them. Experiment with Maine's recent idea of ranked choice voting, where voters prioritize all candidates. If no one wins a majority, the lowest vote getter is dropped. His or her votes are reallocated to the others until someone gets a majority, incentivizing politicians to be broadly appealing because they want to be every voter's backup choice. Or maybe it's time to experiment with public financing of elections. I was never a big fan, but maybe in the whole business of special interest money, selected donors with disproportionate voice, and members of Congress flying all around the country to solicit funds. Bust the whole cycle. Or mandate a minimum number of days in congressional session, now averaging 139 a year, require members to spend more time face-to-face trying to solve the nation's problems. Personal ideas to improve civility, some ideas focused on Congress to improve civility, one other area. Even more pressing is work by high-tech companies to tamp down threats of violence. After Charlottesville, Facebook took some responsibility by closing accounts joined by PayPal, GoDaddy, Spotify, and Cloudflare. But those are baby steps. Congress held hearings on the resolve of the high-tech companies to remedy the mess that festered during the election cycle. Facebook testified after the fact that it discovered that 80,000 Russian link posts went out to 126 million Americans. Twitter announced it was revoking 2,752 Russian linked accounts that churned out 1.4 million tweets. Maybe the social media companies should become more regulated as the communications companies they are rather than the tech companies they claim to be. Even Mark Zuckerberg now says this. And as citizens, back to us, we share responsibility here when we forward or like wacky posts on social media. We become pawns for attacks on our fellow citizens and our democratic institutions. Perhaps policymakers should resurrect some variation of the former FCC fairness doctrine that forced networks into more balanced coverage, or maybe policymakers should tiptoe into the world of angry talk radio and cable television, not trying to regulate them, that's a First Amendment problem, but holding hearings on the accuracy of their content, maybe shaming them into better behavior. A Blue Ribbon Citizen Commission could accomplish this same goal. The list of ways to improve civility is virtually endless. We can return to teaching more civics in school. We can better convey citizenship as a solemn responsibility. We can teach more information literacy so citizens can better evaluate social media content. All of these suggestions sound sort of naive. They're hard to implement. Some smack up against competing values we hold dear. My point isn't that these are the only solutions or that these are the right solutions. My point is simply that we can experiment with public policy change to complement change in our personal lives, to improve the tone. And please, 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 please don't toss your hands up. Don't surrender on this whole issue. We forget this, but historically, Americans birthed a new type of regime in the history of the world. We persevered through a war of independence, westward expansion, slavery, a civil war, 2 world wars, a Great Depression, street protests, 9/11 attacks, scandals, impeachment, and our fair share of fools and demagogues. So many have sacrificed so much to get us to this point. The pilgrims or patriots who risked everything for freedom, or suffragettes, or abolitionists, or civil rights leaders, or LGBTQ activists wishing to extend human rights, or workers and industrialists alike who built the world's colossal economy, and yes, the soldiers who fought around the world to help keep us safe, probably some of you, and even more remarkably, just to set other people in this world free. We are the beneficiaries of so much sacrifice by so many. Surely, we are up to the task as a people of improving our public dialogue. The end of the Civil War offers rich examples of bitter adversaries picking a constructive path for the good of the nation. I think I'm doing pretty good. I'm on my last page and Di's not up yet. I think I'm going to make it. General Grant offered generous terms of surrender to the Confederates. Joshua Chamberlain ordered his Union men to salute the Confederates as they laid down their rifles. Abraham Lincoln told the band at a surrender celebration to play Dixie, said it was a good tune. General Lee dismissed Confederate pleas to wage a guerrilla war, quietly ran a college in rural Virginia until he died. General Longstreet, famous at Gettysburg, accepted a post in the Republican Party and became President Grant's ambassador to Turkey. Shortly before he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and I grabbed this quote for that little Gettysburg Revisited thing that's on your tables. Shortly before he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln said of American democracy, "We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope on earth. The way is plain, peaceful, generous, just. A way which, if followed, the world will forever applaud." Our leaders are struggling, so maybe it's up to us as American citizens to ensure that the world forever will applaud. I think we can do this, and I thank you for hearing me out today. Yeah, if there's time.
Questions?
Who figured a professor would finish ahead of time? Huh? Come on.
Any questions?
Are we requiring civics as an instructional course in junior high school or high school today across the nation, or not?
I don't know the answer to that because I don't know enough about K-12 curricula. I do know that a lot of the disciplines, I used to talk about this when I was president of the Arts and Sciences, and I would go talk about the liberal arts and sciences around the country. One of the things that we did, a byproduct, and it's complicated, I don't really want to wade into it, but when we went down the road of No Child Left Behind, we put more focus, maybe understandably, on some of the math and science disciplines because we've tended to lag the world there. But what we did was also then focus on curricula that were more easily testable. And so it put a lot of pressure on history, it put a lot of pressure on art and music and other parts of the curriculum. And some of those things kind of fell by the wayside, as did physical education in the schools. There was a lot of decline of those kinds of things. So I don't know, I can't tell you. There is a general sense of, and polls show this, of more historical amnesia maybe than there used to be. But it's really complicated. It's like all these young kids have to learn this whole world of computers and social media that we didn't when I was growing up, so there was more time in the day, right? So I don't know what the right answer is, but I think the idea that my favorite line of what I wrote is that ignorance blended with incivility invites volatility. That one has me worried. Yes, sir.
Your point. The reconciliation that you described starting in 1865 was triggered by a tangible end to the Civil War. How would you envision, in our current circumstances, moving to a process of reconciliation when it's hard to imagine a tangible end to our in-Civil War?
That's a great question, and I don't have an answer to that one. What I tell people, I was saying to Mike, was that I sort of wake up every day like a golden retriever puppy, and I just start over and try again to talk to Americans about tamping down this season of ill will that has arisen among us, not only for the safety of that as a regime and as a people, but because at just sort of a human level, it's really like the right thing to do. And so I think we need to get focused in on it. That's part of what we're trying to do at the Gettysburg Foundation. And before time elapses completely, those of you that don't know the good Mr. Bob Kinsley sitting right here probably did more than any other human being alive to transform Gettysburg into that marvelous place it now is today. And so we are out on the road. It's on, that little brochure is on your table. Take it with you. Help us out if you are willing at some point. We'll have, by mid-July, we'll have done about 22 different events in 11 different states. And we're just trying to take that Lincoln message of humility and thoughtfulness out to talk to Americans just like you in different places. Sometimes I go to universities. They get the hour-long version, the poor devils. I go to Rotary clubs for the 20, 25-minute version, just to talk to people about putting it high up in your public consciousness that yes, as an individual, I can help solve this problem. I can be that role model. I can tamp things down. I can listen. I can bring humility to what I think. To think about whether or not some of these changes with legislatures might give us a better pool of nationwide quality candidates, people drawn to public service, not drawn to being in the feud, right? And then we've really got to think about what we're doing in the whole social media world, right? It's like all this angry and mean one-liners and vindictive stuff, and you can pick your favorite person as to who offends you the most. There's a bunch of them out there. There's millions. But that's something we've got to think about as a people. I often say to the young people, including my daughter, I say, honey, I think your generation is going to be more accepting and inclusive than any generation ever before. Good for you. But I'm a little worried that you're taking enough time to become good custodians of the democratic tradition, which means you have to learn the system, which means you have to act within it, which means you have to sort of understand conceptually that the framers built it very complicated, very frustrating sometimes, with all these checks and balances and division for a very good reason. No more King George's, individual liberty, protection of us through the division of political power, and that means those who are our leaders need to cooperate in order to make things happen. And I think, you know, it's not necessarily a forever thing, right? The gentleman who gave that lovely invocation, that was a beautiful companion piece to what I was saying today. Thank you. You know, points out that the Civil War period was more horrific than publicly insulting each other, which is what we're doing right now. So we can fix this. We just have to be a little more determined about it. It has to be part of what we're thinking about. So I'm trying to get you to think about it, and I'm getting free lunch to do it, so it's a twofer for me. All right, thank you.